Hey everyone, we're continuing to look at international trade. This time we are looking at how countries protect themselves from free trade, or more correctly, they protect local industries from free trade. Okay, so free trade is international trade that takes place without any trade barriers, but there are trade barriers that exist, and some countries use them a bit more than others. So one is tariffs. These are a tax on imports. Production subsidies, so they subsidize their local industries to protect them from the competition so they can still be competitive. And we've also got some administrative protection. So these are the ones we're going to be looking through. Tariffs, taxes and imports. Simple. Donald Trump, this guy, he did a lot on tariffs when he was the president of the US. So the US imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium, and they did that to help their local steel and aluminium industries. So this was one of his sort of promises to the people when he got elected. He said, I'll bring back American steel. I'm not going to try to do his voice. I'll bring back American steel, make America great again, etc. They got a very proud steel industry, and he thought, if I put tariffs on imported steel, then our local steel industry will be stronger, right? That's the logic. How's that work? We hopefully remember this diagram. This is our free trade diagram. So here we have the world price. So it's a low price because we've got lots of countries who are pretty good at making steel, and a low price. And so local steel producers in the US can only produce Q1, but all the firms who want steel, demanding steel, they want Q2. So the difference between the two is made up by imports. All right. Now, a tax on steel, what that does, it increases costs for importers, decreasing supply. So if you're importing steel into the US, you've got to pay a tax to the government, which makes that imported steel essentially more expensive. You're not going to buy it as much because it's more expensive. This reduces the supply. We know that a tax is a decrease in supply. But what does a decrease in supply look like when this curve is flat? Well, it looks like this. This is price, or world price plus tariff. And this is world supply plus tariff. All right, so the curve shifts up. So it makes the price higher. Of course, a tax makes the price higher. So with these tariffs, the low world price isn't as low anymore. It's now up here. And we can see what this changes in the diagram, right? Domestic suppliers now can produce more. They can be competitive up until this higher price. So some of the less efficient domestic steel producers are now going to be better off. They can still compete in the market. And what it also does is it means that local consumers don't want to buy as much steel because it now costs more. So it reduces this shortage, which means it reduces the amount of imports. So our post-tariff imports after the tariff, Q3 to Q4. There's a lot going on in this diagram. It's okay if you don't get it immediately. We'll do plenty of practice with these so that we will get it. Okay. So here's the main thrust of it, right? A tax on imports makes imports more expensive. Fewer imports are therefore bought. And what you have done is you have protected local firms from those cheaper imports, right? Those firms can stay in business, still employ people. That's sort of the goal. Okay. Now we're going to go into a little bit more detail here. I do suggest you draw this diagram again, and you are going to show some things on it. Because there's a lot that we can look at. So we're going to look at the revenues. I've even got a whole table on everything, so we know this is serious. So domestic revenue, if there is free trade, would be this low world price, so no tariffs. This would be that low world price, and how Q1, that's the quantity that domestic suppliers are willing to produce. That would be domestic revenue under free trade. Foreign revenue under free trade would be the amount foreign producers of steel make, right? So it's the imports, Q1 to Q2, times the price that they receive, PW. So it's this whole rectangle here. And domestic revenue, if there is a tariff on, domestic revenue increases because they now get to sell for a higher price and they sell more. So higher price, PW plus T compared to PW, and Q3 compared to Q1. So they're better off. We know that. Foreign revenue, once tariffs are in, they make less, right? Because the US is not importing as much steel. So it's now only Q4 minus Q3, right? Q4 minus Q3. And they still only get this low price because the difference here is the tax. That money goes to the government. That doesn't go to the foreign suppliers. So they still earn the same price, that same world price, but they sell less now. So they're definitely worse off. And government revenue. Now, this looks really complicated down here, but it's this rectangle here. So it's the amount of tariffs, the amount of imports that are now put in place, multiplied by how much the tax is on those imports. So the tax is the difference between the curves, the vertical difference between the curves, and multiplied by the number of imports that there now are. Right? Some people make the mistake of saying, well, we were importing Q1 to Q2, so if you put a tax on that, it's going to be the tax times those original imports. Forgetting, of course, that you put a tax on, people buy less of it. So you got to remember that aspect, that people will buy less of it, Q3 to Q4 now. Okay. And there's a bit more that we do this with this diagram as well. So these are fun diagrams. We get to do lots of fun stuff with them. We can also look at the welfare of them. We remember from market failure that there are welfare losses when there are inefficient markets. This is an inefficient market now. So these triangles that I've done in pink here, they are welfare loss. So this is deadweight loss due to inefficient production. So we're now consuming steel that has been produced more inefficiently. So that's not good, right? That's a loss to society. We should be, to be as efficient as possible, we should be consuming the steel that's produced most efficiently. And this deadweight loss is due to less production due to the higher price, right? So we're just not producing as much anymore. People want it at a low price, people take it, but at the high price, people don't want as much. It's only because of that artificial sort of tax in there that people aren't consuming it. So it's now not efficient. Okay, so those are our welfare losses. Okay, we're going to look at production subsidies now. So Holden cars, I tend to talk about Holden a bit, partly because I'm old, I guess, but they exist, they're cars, everyone knows what cars are. And we used to produce these. There used to be a factory out in Elizabeth, north of the city, north of Adelaide, that employed a huge amount of people making these cars, Holden Commodores generally. Now, subsidies are payments to firms for producing a good. So the more cars they produce, so for each car, they get money for producing a car, and it helps them compete with imports. So it keeps their costs of production lower so that they can be competitive on price with the other imported cars. Okay, so here's our free trade diagram. There's no subsidy yet, so this should look familiar to us. Now let's add the subsidy on. Subsidy goes on this curve because the subsidy is to domestic suppliers. The tariff went on this curve because the tariff went on the rest of the world. Subsidy goes on domestic producers. So as we should perfectly remember from microeconomics, a subsidy shifts the supply curve to the right. So shifts it to the right. the distance between the curves is the amount of the subsidy in terms of dollar value. Okay, so what did I just do there? Yeah, so these are the amount of imports before the subsidy. We add subsidy, and suddenly we're able to, instead of being able to produce Q1 at that low world price, we're happy we can produce Q3 because we've lowered our costs of production. So we're selling more cars, we're producing more cars domestically now, right? And so all that does is it reduces the imports. So it used to be Q2 minus Q1, now it's Q2 minus Q3, this amount. Okay. We're going to get up a little table again, right? This is fun. So foreign revenue with free trade, it's that world price times the imports, Q1 to Q2, right? And domestic revenue under free trade is just that amount, that quantity that domestic producers are willing and able to make at that low price, multiplied by that low price. Domestic revenue for firms, if they receive a subsidy, they get the world price. Consumers still pay the world price, but they also get what the government gives them, right? So they get more revenue. So the revenue they receive is PW plus the subsidy, plus that, I'm pointing with my finger, that's silly, plus that vertical distance between the supply curves there, okay? And then the foreign revenue with the subsidy, it's relatively straightforward. They still get that low price, but now they have a lower quantity. So it's Q2 minus Q3 rather than Q2 minus Q1. Okay. Welfare. So this being the government payment, I just want to make that clear as well. But the welfare effect, this is deadweight loss due to inefficient production. So there's more cars being made by inefficient local producers. They're not great at making cars. That's why we don't make them anymore. Not great at making them. It's inefficient production. Now we don't have this other triangle over here because that was due to the high price. There's no high price now. Price stays low. So it's not as inefficient here. Okay. Some administrative protections. There's this no diagrams here. This is a bit more just theory. So types of protection, we can have embargoes. So that's a ban on importing certain goods. So high-powered weapons, yeah, they're illegal in Australia, so we don't import those. That's an embargo. And it's probably redundant now with the internet, but there used to be certain types of pornography that Australia didn't want in the country because it was too filthy. There was an embargo on those sorts of things. Quarantine. Australia, we're an island nation. We can keep out diseases. We're good at that. So isolation of plants and animals to stop the spreading of disease. So what that does, if you want to run a business importing, cute little dogs from Japan or something, having to put them in quarantine for 3 months or whatever, that limits how viable they are as an import. So therefore, we're not going to import as many of them. And what it does, it protects the local industry. Very famous example, I guess it was 2015. One of our ministers we threatened to put down Johnny Depp's dogs because he brought them into the country illegally. He didn't quarantine them, but they were in the country, and he went on national TV and said, yeah, we'll put them down. I don't care if you're the world's sexiest man, we're still going to do it. So the importance of these types of protections is protect the local country, the local industry from diseases, that sort of thing, which can actually ruin the industry. So these dogs actually went to a grooming salon. They could have brought all sorts of dog diseases. Like we don't have rabies, for example, in Australia. So there was a risk. So it was high profile. It was a bit funny, but it's also kind of serious. Other administrative protections, we've got things called technical specifications, so standards that products must meet. So Australian standards we have. If you ever really can't get to sleep, you could look through the Australian standards that are available online for a ladder, for example. They're a standard that any ladder sold in Australia has to meet. They've got to meet these specifications so that people don't hurt themselves, the ladders don't fall apart too easily, that sort of thing. What these technical specifications do, though, is they increase costs for foreign producers. If you want to export your good to Australia, if you want to export your ladder to Australia, you've got to meet the Australian standards for ladders. So you might have to amend your product a little bit in your factory for the Australian market. You might have to have a separate production line sort of thing. So that increases costs for them. They can't just make all the same to sell to the rest of the world. Okay, so I want you to have a go. Draw the effect of Australia's requirement for right-hand drive vehicles. We have to drive on the right-hand side of the car on a foreign car maker. All right, so demand supply diagram, what's that going to do to a foreign car maker? Okay, this is what it's going to do. Demand supply diagram, boom, boom. It's going to decrease supply because it's going to increase their costs of production. It's going to be more expensive for them to make cars that match our market if all the other cars are for a left-hand drive market. Right now, countries have been accused of using these types of protections, these quarantine rules and technical specifications. They've been accused of using these to unfairly protect their industry, so to be almost punitive on foreign manufacturers to actually protect their local industries. So they have been weaponized to an extent, but our main focus will be on tariffs and subsidies as forms of trade protection. Okay, thank you. I'll see you in class.